My name's Lana, just a regular girl who ended up pouring drinks at Joe's bar downtown after high school. It wasn't anything fancy, but it paid the bills and kept me busy. That's where I first laid eyes on Daniel. It was a Thursday night, the kind where the bar was buzzing but not too packed, just how I like it. In walked this guy, Daniel, with a few of his buddies. Right off, he stuck out. Not because he was loud or anything, he was the calm kind, the kind that had an easy smile and a look in his eyes that said he knew something you didn't. He sauntered over to the bar and took a seat right in front of where I was working. "Hey," he said, flashing that grin. "What's good here, besides the view?" I shot him a look. "Beer's cold, if that's what you mean," I replied, not letting on that I caught his cheeky compliment. His laugh was genuine, and it made me smile despite myself. "I'll take one then, and whatever you recommend for yourself. Let's make it two," he added. Pouring the drinks, I couldn't help but notice the way he watched me, not in a creepy way, but like he was actually interested in what I was doing. "So, you come here often?" I joked as I handed him the beers. "First time, actually. My friend said this place has the best service in town." "Guess they were right," Daniel said, his eyes not leaving mine. We chatted more than I usually did with customers. He told me about his college days, all fancy and full of big words I didn't bother to remember. And I told him about growing up here in town, how I always thought I'd do something more but never figured out what that more was. "You're interesting, Lana," he said out of the blue. "Not like the usual crowd in here." I raised an eyebrow. "Thanks, I guess. You're not too bad yourself, for a rich boy." He laughed again, that sound that filled up the space around us. "Rich boy, huh? Trust me, having money's not all it's cracked up to be." We got interrupted then by his friends, who were ready to move on to some club or another. He stood up, tossed a 50 on the bar, way too much for 2 beers, and winked. "Maybe I'll find that right company if I come back here." And just like that, he was gone, melting into the crowd with his friends. But something about him lingered, like the echo of his laugh in my ears, making me wonder if I'd see him again. Daniel started showing up at the bar every single night after that first encounter. At first, I figured he was just like any other guy, killing time with a beer and small talk. But then, the talks got longer and a whole lot more personal. He'd settle into his usual spot, and as I wiped down the counter or restocked the shelves, he'd tell me bits and pieces about his life, his family. "My dad's pretty big into politics," he'd say with a casual shrug, like he was talking about the weather, not dropping that his father was one of the state's top politicians. "And Mom, well, she's a housewife, keeps everything running smooth at home." The more we talked, the more I saw past the polished surface. Sure, he had money and a name that opened doors, but there was something else, something real that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And despite my better judgment, I found myself looking forward to those evenings when he'd show up. One night, it all changed. He came in looking serious, his usual smile nowhere in sight. "Lana, I've been thinking," he started, hesitating a bit. "How about we go out tomorrow? Somewhere nice, not just here." It was sudden, but not unwelcome. "Like a date?" I asked, trying to sound cool but feeling my heart thump a little harder. "Yeah, a date," he confirmed, his smile back as if he'd won some sort of victory seeing my reaction. That date led to another and another. Before I knew it, we were seeing each other every day. Daniel talked about his life, and I shared mine. He'd laugh off the differences, saying, "Wealth's my only drawback, you know." But it wasn't just his wealth. Daniel loved the high life, parties, late nights, the kind of leisure I could hardly imagine. He brushed off my concerns with a wave. "Things will change, Lana. You'll see." Then came the night he wanted me to meet his parents. I was a bundle of nerves. We drove up to their mansion, the kind of place you see in movies, with sprawling gardens and more rooms than you'd know what to do with. His mother, Mrs. Patricia Gilmore, was as chilly as the marble floors, sizing me up like I was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. "A waitress," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Really, Daniel, you expect her to fit into our world? His father, Gerald Gilmore, however, beamed at me as if I was the first honest thing he'd seen in years. Lana, dear, it's refreshing to see someone from real life. You're just what we need. A bridge to the common man, right before the elections. I didn't know whether to be flattered or offended. The dinner was tense, Mrs. Gilmore sniping comments under her breath, Mr. Gilmore countering with grand declarations about my refreshing simplicity. At one point, Mrs. Gilmore had enough, standing up so fast her chair almost toppled over. I will not stand for this, she hissed, storming out of the room. Mr. Gilmore just winked at me across the table. Don't you worry, Lana. Everything will be just fine. That wink was supposed to reassure me, but it felt like I was being swept into a game I didn't know how to play. Weeks later, Daniel got down on one knee, right there in the bar where we first met, with the same cheeky grin he had that first night. Marry me, Lana, and let's show them all how it's done, he said. And I, lost in the moment and in him, said yes. The wedding was anything but the quiet affair I'd hoped for. From the moment Daniel popped the question, his father took over the whole show. He insisted on a grand ceremony, one that would be talked about far and wide. It'll be perfect for the campaign, he'd say with a sly grin, every time I brought up keeping things small. So, there I was, standing in a dress fancier than anything I'd ever owned, with cameras flashing in my face as I tried to keep my smile from faltering. The reporters swarmed around us, and Mr. Gilmore relished every moment, playing the gracious father-in-law to perfection. See, folks, this is what real love looks like. Unity across different worlds, he announced to the cameras, slinging his arm around me a little too tightly. I glanced over at my parents, sitting off to the side, their expressions a mix of awe and discomfort. They weren't used to this kind of spectacle, and frankly, neither was I. Mrs. Gilmore, decked out in a dress that probably cost more than my dad's car, pasted on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She leaned in during the photo op, whispering through clenched teeth, "Smile, Lana. Today, we're all family." After the spectacle, Daniel and I moved into a luxury apartment, a stark contrast to my modest childhood home. It was a wedding gift from his parents, lavish and sprawling, located in one of the city's most exclusive buildings. Daniel's nights out with his friends became more frequent, and I found myself alone in our expansive living space more often than not. His mother, Mrs. Gilmore, took it upon herself to drop by unannounced, always with a critique ready at her lips. One such afternoon, she found me trying to straighten up the mess from one of Daniel's late-night gatherings. She surveyed the room with a disdainful eye before fixing her gaze on me. "Lana, this isn't some roadside diner. You need to keep a better eye on Daniel. Look at him, he's out all the time, drinking, and it's your job to rein him in." I bristled at her words, my hands clenching the dishcloth tighter. "And what exactly do you suggest I do, Mrs. Gilmore? Chain him to a chair?" Her lips thinned into a line. "Don't be smart, Lana. You need to take control. Otherwise, you're just as much to blame." The air was tense between us, the only sounds the soft tick of the expensive clock on the wall and the distant hum of city life outside the windows. That night, when Daniel came home, I tried to talk to him about it. "Your mom thinks I'm not doing enough to keep you in line," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Daniel's reaction was immediate and heated. "You gonna listen to her? Let's not let her get between us, okay? I love you, Lana. We'll figure this out together." But as the weeks rolled on, nothing changed. Daniel's assurances felt more and more hollow, and I found myself questioning whether love was enough to bridge the chasm that seemed to be widening between us. Living the high life wasn't all it was cracked up to be, not by a long shot. I found myself constantly tidying our massive apartment, cooking meals that often went cold before Daniel got home, and hustling laundry to and from the cleaners, all while holding down my shifts at Joe's bar. Meanwhile, Daniel, with no job on his horizon, seemed content to blow through his hefty allowance on nights out with his friends. Daniel's mother, the queen of high society gossip, made sure everyone knew her twisted version of our life. According to her, I was the villain, a dumb, greedy woman who led her poor son astray with my low-class ways. It was a normal day at the bar when she decided to bring her highfalutin friends for a casual lunch. The moment they strutted in, I knew I was in for it. They perched at the bar, their noses turned up like they smelled something foul. Mrs. Gilmore waved me over with a flick of her wrist, her voice loud enough to turn a few heads. "Lana, darling, could you hurry up? We don't have all day, and we expect proper service even in this establishment." Her friends snickered, their eyes scanning the bar with barely disguised contempt. I forced a smile, taking their orders while my hands itched to dump a tray of drinks right into their laps. "Make sure the glasses are clean, dear. We wouldn't want to catch anything," one of her cronies quipped, her laughter sharp as shattered glass. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, my tone syrupy sweet. I delivered their drinks and food with a smile plastered on, though inside I felt anything but cheerful. As I passed by with another order, Mrs. Gilmore grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "You know, Lana, it's a shame you don't use your husband's money to better yourself. Maybe some classes in etiquette? Or a seminar on how to be a supportive wife?" I pulled away gently, keeping my voice steady. "I appreciate the advice, Mrs. Gilmore. I'll give it all the consideration it deserves." The bar couldn't close fast enough that day. Each comment, each condescending look from that table, added weight to the growing dread that this was my life now, scrutinized and scorned, no matter how hard I tried. Back at our apartment, the silence was a stark contrast to the chaos at the bar. Daniel was out again, the note on the fridge a weak apology for missing dinner. I was left alone with my thoughts, which were as cluttered as the untouched plates on our dining table. Meanwhile, I started paying the bills from my own tips, because Daniel's idea of budgeting was seeing how quickly he could spend his money each month. Groceries, utilities, even the damn cable bill, I covered them all. His promises to get his act together and find a job were as empty as our conversations. The election season was in full swing, and Mr. Gilmore was more eager than ever to parade me around at every possible public event. He'd introduce me with great fanfare, always emphasizing how his son had married a simple girl from the people. At rallies, dinners, and interviews, I wore my smile like a mask, nodding and playing the part of the approachable daughter-in-law. But behind the smiles and the polite applause, I was weary. The constant scrutiny, the endless small talk with people who cared more about my story as a campaign tool than as a person, it was exhausting. More than once, I found myself eyeing the exits at these events, longing for nothing more than to run out and never look back. One evening, after yet another fundraiser that had stretched on for hours, Mr. Gilmore pulled me aside, his hand gripping my shoulder a little too firmly. "Lana, I need you to keep this up. You know, your cooperation is crucial. Remember, your lifestyle, this apartment, it's all thanks to our support." I nodded, the thread in his tone clear as glass. "Of course, Mr. Gilmore. I understand." It wasn't just the campaign that was putting pressure on me. Things at home were no better. Daniel's behavior had escalated from neglect to outright destructiveness. He'd come home late, if he came home at all, often drunk and sometimes barely able to stand. Then came the night that changed everything. Daniel stumbled through the door well past midnight, his face ashen, eyes wild with panic. He collapsed onto the sofa, his hands shaking. "Lana, I've screwed up," he blurted out, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I owe money, a lot of money. To some really bad people. I lost it at the casino, and they're not the type to wait for their cash." My stomach twisted at his words. "How much?" "70,000, he murmured, looking away. I felt cold all over. $70,000? He nodded, miserable. "I need your help, Lana. Please, I can't ask my parents. They'd disown me." The desperation in his eyes was something I couldn't ignore. He grabbed my hands, his grip tight. "I swear, Lana, if you help me with this, I'll change. I know I've been a terrible husband, but I'll do anything to make this right. Please." Something in me broke then. Despite the anger and the disappointment, I couldn't let him face this alone. "Okay, Daniel. I'll help you. But this is it. You have to turn things around." I took out a loan the next day, $70,000 that felt like a noose around my neck. But as I handed the money over, Daniel was like a man reborn. He helped around the house, cut back on the drinking, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I let myself believe that we could actually make this work. We spent evenings together, talking about plans for the future, even daring to dream about starting a family. Daniel was attentive, helping with chores, sharing meals at the same table, things we hadn't done in years. "Maybe we should think about having a kid," he suggested one night as we cleaned up after dinner. I looked at him, surprised but not unhappy at the thought. "Really? You think we're ready?" He smiled, pulling me close. "Yeah, I do. I mean, we're getting back on track, right? A fresh start." I wanted to believe him, to believe in us. And in those moments, it was easy to imagine that everything could actually be okay, that the debts and lies were behind us. But that illusion shattered the night I came home from a double shift at the bar. Tossing my keys on the counter, I headed for the bedroom, my body aching for just a few hours of sleep before doing it all over again. But the scene I walked into snapped me wide awake. Daniel was passed out on our bed, snoring loudly, with two girls I'd never seen before curled up beside him, both just as unconscious. Bottles and glasses littered the nightstand, the stench of alcohol heavy in the air. My heart hammered against my ribcage as a cold rage settled in my gut. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and started recording. The camera's light cut through the darkness, capturing the damning scene. I nudged Daniel awake, my voice sharp. "Daniel, who are these girls?" He blinked up at me, confused and still drunk, then waved a dismissive hand as if brushing away the question. "They're just my girlfriends, you know? It's not a big deal. We do this sometimes when you're at work." That was it. The final betrayal. I stopped the recording, my hands trembling with a cocktail of emotions, rage, sorrow, disbelief. I stepped out of the room, dialed Mr. Gilmore, and waited for him to pick up. "Lana? What's wrong?" His voice was cautious, alert. "Mr. Gilmore, I'm done. I just caught Daniel in our bed with two other women. I've recorded everything, and I want a divorce," I said, each word measured, heavy with finality. He was at the apartment within the hour, his face a mask of controlled fury as he glanced at the still unconscious figures in my bed. Daniel had woken up by then, looking sheepish and scared as his father berated him in hushed, vicious tones. "You idiot! Look what you've done!" Turning to me, Mr. Gilmore's tone softened. "Lana, I'll handle this. Let's keep it quiet, for everyone's sake. What do you need?" $500,000, the apartment sold and the money transferred to me, and the loan I took out for him cleared, I stated, each demand non-negotiable. Mr. Gilmore nodded slowly, calculating. "Done. But you must agree to keep this quiet. Move away, start fresh somewhere else. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said simply. There was nothing left for me here, no reason to stay. "And Lana, don't tell his mother. She'd make a scene, and we can't afford that now, not with the elections." The divorce papers came through quietly. I signed them in the dim light of dawn, alone. Mr. Gilmore kept his word. The money was in my account within days, the loan was paid off, and I was free from Daniel and his destructive whims. Settling into my new life in another city felt like breathing fresh air after being submerged underwater for too long. The day I moved into my new apartment in a peaceful neighborhood, I knew I had made the right decision. It was smaller than the luxurious prison I'd left behind, but it was all mine. The first thing I did after unpacking was block every number associated with my old life. Every ring was a potential drag back into that mess, and I wasn't about to let that happen. Then, I went out and bought myself a car. Nothing too fancy, but sleek and new, something just for me. A few days later, I landed a job as an administrator at a local restaurant. It was a step up from waitressing, with regular hours and no late nights. The owner, a wiry woman named Carla, with a sharp tongue and a no-nonsense attitude, took me under her wing. "You new to town?" Carla asked on my first day, eyeing me with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Yeah, just moved in," I replied, keeping my past tucked away like the folded boxes in my closet. Carla nodded, as if approving my concise answer. "Well, here's your desk, and here are your responsibilities. You keep things running smooth, and we'll get along just fine." "I appreciate it, Carla. I won't let you down," I promised, eager to prove my worth in this new role. The job was busy, filled with the usual chaos of restaurant life, but I thrived on the structure it brought to my days. I was making my own money, controlling my own fate. It felt good, honest and real. Encouraged by Carla's blunt but fair management style, I decided to enroll in the local college. I wanted more than just to escape my past, I wanted to build something lasting. Night classes in business management seemed like the right path, and stepping into the classroom, I felt a surge of pride. I was doing this for me, no one else. One evening, as I was locking up the restaurant, Carla stopped by my desk. "Heard you're hitting the books at night. That's good. Keep that brain working." I smiled, grateful for her recognition. "Trying to. Figured it's never too late to start fresh, right?" "Damn right," Carla said with a nod. "You ever need help, you let me know. I know a thing or two about keeping a business above water." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, study, and the quiet solitude of my apartment. I relished the normalcy, the mundane moments that I used to take for granted. It was during one of these quiet nights, sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea, that I realized just how much I had changed. The city lights sparkled in the distance, each one a reminder of where I'd been and where I was heading. 2 years had slipped by since I cut all ties with my old life and started anew. I was sitting in my living room, cozy and warm, a book forgotten on my lap, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and hesitating for a split second, I answered. "Lana, this is Patricia Gilmore." The voice came through, high-pitched and frantic. "Daniel is in trouble because of your negligence." I was taken aback. "Mrs. Gilmore, slow down. What are you talking about? What trouble?" She was nearly breathless with agitation. "An unknown friend of Daniel called me. He said Daniel got into a fight with a policeman in a bar. I had to transfer money to keep him out of jail. I took it from our savings, and Gerald doesn't know yet." "Why weren't you there for him?" "Mrs. Gilmore, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Daniel and I have been divorced for 2 years. I haven't seen or spoken to him since." There was a pause, and then, "Divorced? What are you talking about? Why didn't anyone tell me?" "You didn't know because it was meant to be kept quiet for the family's sake, for the election and all. I'm sorry you were left out, but I am no longer part of Daniel's life or your family." "And what happened to the policeman and Daniel?" Her voice cracked, and I could hear the confusion and fear seeping through. Laughing softly, I tried to find some humor in the absurdity of the situation. "Mrs. Gilmore, you've been scammed. There's no doubt about it. These scammers probably made up the whole story about the policeman just to trick you out of your money." There was a pause on the line as the realization sank in. Her voice quivered, fear replacing the anger from moments before. "Scammed? Oh no, what have I done?" Her tone was frantic, the weight of her mistake crashing down. "Can't you just lend me some money to put back before Gerald finds out?" "Please, Lana." "Mrs. Gilmore, I can't. It's not my place anymore. I've moved on. You need to handle this with your family," I replied, firm yet not unkind. Her crying intensified, then turned to anger. "You could help, but you choose not to. You're just as selfish as everyone said." I sighed, a deep, weary release. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I truly hope you sort this out, but I must go now." I hung up before she could reply, her sobs echoing in my ear even after the line went dead. Looking around my peaceful apartment, the stark contrast between my current life and the chaos of the past made me shudder. I picked up my phone again, this time navigating through the settings to block yet another number. As I set the phone down, a sense of finality washed over me. I was truly free now.